the Duchess who governed London's high society, the silent empire of the Duchess of Devonshire. A German countess arrived in London and became the most powerful woman in England. Louise Friederike Auguste, Countess von Alten, was born on the 15th of June 1832 in the Kingdom of Hanover, the daughter of Count Karl Franz Victor von Alten and his wife Hermine von Schminke. Her early life in Hanover was sheltered, comfortable, and entirely provincial. She and her siblings tended flower gardens and fruit orchards, learning the domestic arts of aristocratic German household management. She was 17 years old when her family attended the opera in Nice on the French Riviera, and a young Englishman in the audience fell immediately in love with her. He was William Drogo Montague, Viscount Mandeville, eldest son and heir of the 6th Duke of Manchester. He presented himself to the family, declared his intentions, and was accepted. On the 22nd of July 1852, 20-year-old Louise married William at the Palace Chapel in Hanover and subsequently at the British Embassy. She crossed the Channel to England as Viscountess Mandeville and eventually, when William's father died in August 1855, as Duchess of Manchester. Nothing in her upbringing had prepared her for what she would become. The most formidable political and social hostess in the history of Victorian England, the woman who would be described by a contemporary as the most powerful person outside the government, and who would ultimately rule London's high society from Devonshire House on Piccadilly for the final 2 decades of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20th. She was appointed Mistress of the Robes to Queen Victoria in 1858. The first formal recognition of Louise's position in the hierarchy of British aristocratic life came in February 1858, when she was appointed Mistress of the Robes to Queen Victoria. She was 26 years old and had been in England for 6 years. The appointment was a position of considerable honour. The Mistress of the Robes was the senior lady of the Queen's household, responsible for overseeing the Queen's wardrobe and jewellery and for attending the Queen on formal state occasions. She was the principal lady-in-waiting. The appointment required the holder to be of the highest aristocratic rank, politically acceptable to the court, and personally trusted by the monarch. Queen Victoria had a consistent preference for women of Prussian and German connections at court, a preference rooted in her own German background, and Louise's Hanoverian origins recommended her. The appointment lasted from 1858 to 1859, and although its duration was brief, it established Louise at the centre of the court circle in a way that transformed her social position. She was no longer simply the wife of a prominent duke. She was a figure known to the Queen, trusted with responsibilities at the highest level of the royal household, and marked by that association as a woman of the first rank. It was the foundation on which everything that followed was built. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming content about the United Kingdom and its history. Thank you for your support, and now let's continue. Her marriage to Manchester was unhappy, but her social life was not. The private reality of Louise's first marriage was considerably less comfortable than its public face suggested. The 7th Duke of Manchester was a man of expensive tastes, poor financial discipline, and a capacity for spending that consistently outran the revenues of the Manchester estate. Throughout the 1860s, the family's finances were under strain from his profligacy, and Louise was required to manage the consequences of her husband's imprudence while maintaining the outward appearances of ducal prosperity. They eventually separated, living apart for many years while maintaining the formal structure of the marriage. The social consequence of this arrangement was not the withdrawal that might have been expected. Louise continued to function as a prominent social hostess, to attend and to give the significant events of the London season, and to expand her network of political and aristocratic connections with an energy and skill that did not depend on her husband's participation. Contemporary observers noted her as a figure of exceptional social intelligence, a woman who could organise an entertaining house party with the same ease as a serious political dinner, who could speak knowledgeably and discreetly about the major political questions of the day, and who was trusted with confidences by the leading men in public life. Her social career flourished in inverse proportion to her marital happiness, and from the early 1860s it was sustained in part by the attentions of a man who would eventually become her second husband. For 30 years she was the secret companion of the man who refused to be Prime Minister. The central personal relationship of Louise's adult life, sustained across 30 years, conducted in the full knowledge of the aristocratic circles that surrounded both parties and eventually legalised in marriage, was with Spencer Compton Cavendish, Marquess of Hartington, heir to the Dukedom of Devonshire, and one of the most senior figures in Liberal Party politics. Hartington had thrice been offered the position of Prime Minister by Queen Victoria herself, and had 3 times declined. He was a man of considerable intelligence, profound laziness about anything that didn't interest him, and an apparently limitless capacity for falling asleep at unsuitable moments. He was known to have dozed off in the House of Lords during important debates, and was once reportedly found asleep at his club, having previously invited the king to dine. His devotion to Louise was the most consistent emotional commitment of his life. He provided her with a house in Mayfair, accompanied her openly at social events and political gatherings, and was described by contemporaries as being as much in her company as propriety would allow. The single documented moment of indiscretion in their relationship occurred when Louise was overheard addressing him at a country house party as hearty darling, while asking him to stand her a stamp for a letter she was writing. The slip confirmed what everyone in their circle already knew. Devonshire House was the most important political address in London. After the Duke of Manchester died in Naples on the 22nd of March 1890, 2 years of appropriate mourning elapsed, and on the 16th of August 1892 at Christ Church in Mayfair, the 60-year-old Dowager Duchess of Manchester married the 59-year-old Duke of Devonshire. She was a duchess for the second time, which earned her immediately the sobriquet by which she would be known for the rest of her life, the Double Duchess. The Cavendish family seat at Chatsworth in Derbyshire had not had a mistress for 80 years. Louise lost no time in asserting herself. As the new Duchess of Devonshire, she became chatelaine of 7 houses: Chatsworth, Devonshire House, Bolton Abbey, Lismore Castle in Ireland, Hardwicke Hall, Chiswick House, and Compton Place in Eastbourne. Of these, Devonshire House, the Piccadilly mansion of the Dukes of Devonshire, was the most important. It stood opposite Green Park on one of the most prominent addresses in London, and under Louise's management it became the most significant political and social salon in England. She organised dinners that brought together the senior figures of government and opposition, hosted house parties that shaped the informal political conversations of the governing class, and used the access that Devonshire House provided to function as a broker of political influence in ways that no elected office could have replicated. The Devonshire House Ball of 1897 was the most celebrated event of the age. On the 2nd of July 1897, in the midst of the celebrations for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, Louise hosted the Devonshire House Fancy Dress Ball, a costume party held at Devonshire House that became the defining social event of the late Victorian era, and that was spoken of for years afterwards as the most splendid private occasion of the reign. Guests were invited to appear in allegorical or historical costumes predating 1815. More than 1,000 people attended. The Prince and Princess of Wales were present. The Prince dressed as the Grand Master of the Knights of Malta. Louise herself chose a costume of extraordinary magnificence. She appeared as Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra, dressed in a mass of gorgeous embroidery carried out in heliotrope velvet, with lotus flowers studded with tinted gems and devices in terracotta and electric blue velvet, enriched with gold and jewelled embroidery lined with pale blue satin. Her crown was high, of filigree gold surmounted with 2 horns tipped with large diamonds, encrusted with rubies and emeralds, with long chains of pearls falling about the head. She received her guests at the top of the staircase. The costume had been designed by Monsieur Camelli, designer for the Covent Garden Opera House, and made by Worth of Paris. It survives at Chatsworth to this day. She placed playing cards next to the Bibles at Chatsworth, accounts of what life was actually like inside the houses Louise managed, and above all inside Chatsworth, where she established the domestic tone of the Cavendish family's greatest property, reveal a personality of considerable independence and irreverence. As the new chatelaine of a house that had not had a mistress in living memory, Louise did not inherit a set of expectations that she felt obliged to follow. She organised Chatsworth's social life with the same combination of grandeur and informality that had characterised her political dinners. Guests were entertained lavishly, but they were also expected to enjoy themselves in ways that the more rigid conventions of Victorian aristocratic life might not have sanctioned. Her personal passion for cards — she was an enthusiastic and skilled card player — led to the most remembered detail of her domestic management at Chatsworth. She supplied playing cards and gambling chips in every guest room in the house, carefully placed next to the Bibles that tradition required. The mischief was deliberate and was noted with pleasure by guests who wrote about their stays. She rode with the same energy and salty humour that had characterised her younger years. She walked daily regardless of weather. In her 70s, she was photographed riding in an automobile and was described by a biographer as keenly appreciative of the delights of fast travelling by motorcar. She was described as the most powerful person outside the government. The formal assessment of Louise's social and political power that has been most frequently quoted by subsequent historians came from Henry Vane, who wrote that she was said to be the most powerful person outside the government. The description requires some unpacking before its full meaning can be appreciated. In the late Victorian and Edwardian period, the political influence exercised by great political hostesses was not incidental or trivial. Devonshire House, like its counterparts, Holland House, Lansdowne House, and Stafford House in earlier decades, functioned as a space in which the informal conversations that shaped political decisions could take place outside Parliament, outside the formal constraints of official meetings, and with a freedom that the hierarchical structures of government rarely permitted. Political figures who disagreed in public could discuss their disagreements privately at a house party. Policy positions that were not ready to be stated officially could be floated and tested in the drawing room. Information could be shared, alliances confirmed, and the positions of senior figures assessed without any of it appearing in official records or public communications. Louise's access to this space, her ability to invite the right combination of people, to create the conditions in which productive conversation could happen, and to maintain the discretion that made such conversations possible, was the foundation of whatever power she exercised. When Edward VII became king, her influence reached its absolute peak. The accession of Edward VII to the throne in January 1901 transformed the social landscape of London in ways that directly enhanced Louise's position. Edward and his circle, known as the Marlborough House set from the Prince's London residence, had constituted a recognisable social world for decades, and Louise had been a prominent figure within it throughout the 1870s, 80s and 90s. She was among the Brighton set as a famed equestrian, and was personally close to both Edward and his circle. When Edward became king, the court moved from the atmosphere of Victoria's long widowhood to something more lively, more international, more openly pleasure-seeking. Devonshire House, under Louise's management, was well suited to the new dispensation. It was grand enough to receive royalty, well organised enough to manage political guests of the highest seniority, and lively enough to entertain the more socially energetic king and his companions. The Duchess herself, now in her late 60s, was described by contemporaries as the unchallenged mistress of London's political and social life. Her age, if anything, increased rather than diminished her authority. She had outlasted the generation that had competed with her for social precedence, and she stood by the first years of the 20th century as the last surviving figure of a Victorian social world that was already beginning to be described as a lost era. She died at the Sandown races in 1911, and an era died with her. The manner of Louise's death had a fittingness that her admirers recognised immediately. On the 14th of July 1911, aged 79, she attended the races at Sandown Park in Surrey. Her lifelong passion for horses undimmed, her presence at a public event entirely in character with the social instinct that had defined her life. She suffered a seizure at the racecourse. She was taken to nearby Esher Park and she died there on the 15th of July. She was interred at Edensor in Derbyshire, the churchyard adjacent to the Chatsworth estate that serves as the traditional resting place of the Cavendish family. 3 years earlier, in March 1908, she had buried her second husband, the Duke of Devonshire, attended by 300 members of Parliament at his funeral. She had outlasted 2 dukes, survived the transition from Victorian certainty to Edwardian anxiety, and watched the world she had organised slowly transform around her. The author E.F. Benson, who knew her in her final years, described the ageing Duchess with a cruelty that was also accurate. Later she became a wraith of what she had been, and still bewigged and bediamonded and berouged. She was rather like the half-ruinous shell of some castellated keep, with the flower boxes in full bloom on the crumbling sills. The Devonshire House Ball of 1897 was the last great event of its kind. The world that had made it possible disappeared not long after the woman who had organised it.